Most people want the results that come from discipline, growth, and effort, yet they instinctively avoid the very actions that create those outcomes. Difficult tasks often feel heavy, uncomfortable, or mentally resistant, even when we know they are beneficial. This reaction is not a personal flaw. It reflects how the brain naturally operates. The human brain evolved to conserve energy and minimize unnecessary strain, which means it automatically favors comfort and efficiency over challenge. As a result, effort can feel unnatural, while ease feels safe and familiar. However, this preference for comfort is not fixed. It is shaped by experience, and it can be reshaped. The brain learns patterns through repetition, which means it can also learn to respond differently to difficulty. The brain seeks ease. The brain interprets effort as a cost. Tasks that require concentration, persistence, or discomfort consume cognitive and physical resources, and the brain instinctively attempts to conserve those resources whenever possible. In earlier environments, conserving energy was essential for survival, so avoidance of unnecessary effort was adaptive. In modern life, however, this same mechanism often leads to procrastination, distraction, and resistance toward meaningful work. The surrounding environment reinforces this tendency. Many daily activities now provide immediate comfort or stimulation with minimal effort, which reduces tolerance for sustained challenge. When effort is consistently postponed or replaced with easier alternatives, avoidance becomes reinforced. Each time a difficult task is delayed, the brain learns that escape is possible and preferable. Over time, this strengthens resistance to effort and makes future challenges feel even more demanding. Effort can become rewarding. Despite this natural avoidance, the brain is highly adaptable. Experiences that initially feel difficult can become associated with positive outcomes through repetition. Physical training provides a clear example. Exercise often begins as uncomfortable, yet consistent exposure gradually links effort with strength, progress, and satisfaction. What was once resisted becomes tolerated and eventually valued. This same process applies to cognitive and behavioral challenges. When effort repeatedly leads to completion, improvement, or mastery, the brain begins to associate difficulty with gain rather than loss. The perception of effort shifts from threat to opportunity. Over time, this association reduces resistance and increases willingness to engage. Tasks that once felt burdensome begin to feel meaningful, and persistence becomes easier to sustain. If the brain can learn to avoid difficulty, it can also be trained to accept and even prefer it. The next step is understanding how to deliberately build that conditioning. Start small. One of the most common reasons people resist difficult tasks is that the challenge feels overwhelming at the outset. When effort appears too large or demanding, the brain interprets it as a threat to energy and stability, which increases avoidance. This reaction is not about weakness. It reflects a protective mechanism designed to prevent excessive strain. Starting small reduces that perceived threat. When a task is broken into manageable portions, the brain no longer categorizes it as overwhelming. Instead, it becomes approachable and controllable. Each small completion provides evidence that effort is tolerable and achievable. This gradually expands tolerance for difficulty without triggering resistance. Over time, what once seemed demanding begins to feel manageable because exposure occurred incrementally rather than abruptly. Do it daily. Repetition is the mechanism through which the brain forms preference. Neural pathways strengthen each time a behavior is repeated, which means consistent exposure to effort gradually normalizes it. When difficult actions occur sporadically, the brain treats them as exceptional events and maintains resistance. When they occur daily, they become expected. Daily engagement with small challenges teaches the brain that effort is a routine part of experience, rather than an occasional burden. Consistency also reduces anticipatory anxiety because the activity becomes familiar. Familiarity decreases perceived threat, and reduced threat lowers avoidance. As repetition accumulates, resistance weakens and willingness increases. Effort begins to feel less foreign and more integrated into behavior. Finish what you start. Completion plays a critical role in conditioning the brain to tolerate difficulty. When tasks are abandoned midway, the brain associates effort with unfinished strain rather than resolution. This reinforces avoidance because incomplete effort feels wasteful and unrewarding. In contrast, finishing even small tasks creates closure and satisfaction. Completion produces a sense of resolution that signals the brain that effort leads to outcome. This association is essential for building persistence. Each finished task strengthens the link between exertion and reward, which gradually reshapes motivation. Over time, the brain begins to expect completion rather than escape, and willingness to engage with difficulty increases. The act of finishing becomes reinforcing in itself. As tolerance and consistency increase, the brain becomes more receptive to challenge. The next stage of training involves removing avoidance pathways and reshaping how discomfort is perceived. Remove escape routes. Even when people intend to face difficult tasks, avoidance often remains available. Distractions, delays, or alternative activities provide immediate relief from effort, which reinforces the brain's preference for escape. Each time avoidance is chosen, the association between discomfort and withdrawal strengthens. Over time, this pattern makes engagement with difficulty increasingly unlikely. Removing escape routes alters this dynamic. When distractions are reduced and alternatives are limited, the brain no longer expects immediate relief from effort. Instead, engagement becomes the most accessible option. This does not require extreme restriction. It simply involves structuring environments so that the intended task remains easier to continue than to avoid. As escape pathways decrease, persistence increases. The brain adapts to the new pattern and gradually treats effort as the default rather than the exception. Reframe discomfort. Perception strongly influences whether difficulty feels threatening or meaningful. When discomfort is interpreted as a signal of strain or inadequacy, resistance naturally follows. However, when the same sensation is understood as evidence of progress, its emotional tone changes. The physical or cognitive experience remains similar, but its meaning shifts. Reframing discomfort transforms its role. Instead of indicating that something is wrong, it becomes an indicator that adaptation is occurring. This interpretation reduces fear and increases willingness to continue. Over repeated experiences, the brain begins to associate discomfort with growth rather than loss. The sensation itself does not become pleasant, but it becomes acceptable and even purposeful. This shift is essential for sustaining effort over time. When hard things feel normal, when effort is approached gradually, repeated consistently, completed regularly, and supported by environment and perception, the brain adapts. Activities that once triggered avoidance begin to feel familiar. Familiarity reduces resistance, and reduced resistance allows engagement to occur with less hesitation. At this stage, difficult actions require less deliberation and more automatic follow-through. This change reflects conditioning rather than sudden transformation. The individual has not become inherently different. Instead, the brain has learned a new preference through repeated experience. Difficulty has moved from threat to routine. As a result, persistence and resilience appear more natural because the internal response to effort has shifted. Training the brain to like doing hard things follows a clear process. Begin with small challenges that reduce overwhelm. Repeat them daily so effort becomes familiar. Finish what you start to reinforce completion. Remove escape routes so engagement becomes the default. And reframe discomfort as evidence of growth rather than strain. The brain learns what is repeated. When effort is experienced consistently and interpreted constructively, resistance declines and willingness increases. Over time, difficulty stops feeling unnatural and becomes an expected part of action. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for the latest videos.